to market for a documentary, and what can you do just in a kind of straight form, and what do these films do differently to kind of reach their impact potential of the goals that they had. So to start with, I want to look at the genesis of projects and kind of where you came into them, because it's very interesting to look at kind of films in this sphere to see kind of what were the director's intentions when approaching this subject, and did they come at it from a campaign perspective, or did they just stumble across something that could be kind of amplified through an impact campaign? So let's start with Callum. So how did you know about this issue, and when you got to No Fire Zone, kind of how did that come together?
Well, I mean, I got involved because initially I was asked to make a TV program. So, it wasn't actually an issue that I decided to get involved in. I'd made quite a lot of films about war crimes, and films that, we can talk about this perhaps later, could be called campaigning films. And I think because of that, I was asked to make a TV doc about what had happened at the end of the war in Sri Lanka, because Channel 4 News had done a lot of work in terms of getting some of the videos and some of the material out about what had been going on. So I was asked to make a TV program about it, and that, I mean, over the period of making that TV program, I was, astonished and shocked by what we were discovering. And as soon as, of course, we started making the program, we started getting more and more information, and people who'd been shouting about this and nobody had been listening to for years, particularly from the Tamil diaspora, suddenly, thought somebody was listening, I suppose, and we started to getting more and more material. And so we made the first, very briefly, we made the first program. It had quite a remarkable impact, but didn't sort of make any political changes, really. I, at that point, then went back to the channel and said, look, there's more material, we've got to do a follow-up here, we've got to do stuff which tries to get these people, and basically tries to call the guilty to account. And they agreed to do that. And at the end of that, I think by then, if you like, I'd sort of become inadvertently the custodian. I'd been entrusted, I suppose, with so much material, and with the hopes of people who thought that finally the story could be told, that I thought, well, we need to do something that we can campaign with overtly, we can campaign with clearly, and that also sets the story in a much bigger context, includes some of the evidence that we put in the two TV programs. And that's why we decided to make a feature doc, which we knew was never going to make money, and we made with the support. Channel 4 were very supportive of us making it, and ITN Productions, but made it through my own company, and we took that around the world. So that was the kind of genesis, and so this campaigning film, which we ended up with, started as a TV program.
Can we watch the clip of No Fire Zone for those who haven't seen it? Just have a look. And just be warned that there's some graphic images in this clip as well.
It was very understated.
Okay, cool.
There was this large crowd of people pleading with us as the UN, please don't leave. And suddenly your organisation that you had taken to help in times of emergency was pulling you out.
very clearly there's a strong political kind of question there, and a thing about getting very kind of senior heads of state to be involved in the campaign as opposed to kind of individual consumers, both thinking about those as well, but very much a kind of top level conversation that needs to be had. So let's go to Riddhi. So how did you come to the issue in your film, and just give us a little kind of synopsis of what India's Daughter is about?
So India's Daughter is about the 2012 Delhi gang rape, where Jyoti Singh was gang raped on a moving bus and later died of her injuries. Our motivation for making this film was the protesters, actually, who had gone out and protested, and seeing this over and day after day, it made us want to do something. In fact, you know, Leslie and I often talk about it, and we said, you know, we really wish that we'd actually gone out there and protested ourselves. But this was an expression of us doing something about it and actively taking part against violence against women. And so our motivation was to really highlight the issues of sexual violence and rape against women, but why does it happen with such brutality? Because, you know, rapes happen everywhere across the world, but why this case in particular, where people came out and poured out in hundreds and thousands? And that was really what we set out to explore with this film. The first thing we did, in fact, was interview the rapists. For those, I mean, you'll see a trailer, but for those who haven't seen it, we had access to the rapists inside the prison. We interviewed 4 of the rapists that had taken part, that were in this case, and those were the first interviews that we did. So one by one, we were interviewing them, and we thought, there's a pattern here, and the pattern is that there's a lack of education. They hadn't been educated. And so we thought, right, okay, so this must be the problem. But then we went on to interview their lawyers, and you'll see their views, which are even more shocking, to us at least, than the rapists themselves, because the lack of education can be used as an excuse for them, but what is the excuse? A well-qualified lawyer who is probably educated to the highest level. And I'll keep it very brief. So our campaign and the film took us to starting an NGO called the Equality Studies Global Initiative, which is what we're working on at the moment. It's backed by the UN, and to give you a basic summary of it, it's to start a global curriculum which teaches equality studies, because more than access to education, we're concerned with the quality of education, what we're being taught in schools, because we get taught English, we get taught science, we get taught maths, and they're all very important, but we're never really taught how to live. We're never taught how to respect one another. And the lawyers that you'll see and some of the views that you'll hear from them, it was the motivation, and that was the reason why this Equality Studies Initiative was born, because we thought, well, this is a 40-something-year-old man who's saying this. How do you change the views of someone who's had these opinions and views about women all his life? You can't really, which is the harsh reality of it all. So we wanted to start from the grassroots, and the grassroots is to educate those who are just entering school, to create a new generation of equal thinkers. And that's what our campaign, you know, that's what the film has led to, this campaign.
So let's have a look at your trailer to see. Has everybody heard of this film? Had a lot of press. Who hadn't heard of this when it all kicked off? Good. Everybody reads the paper here. That's excellent.
We have the best culture. In our culture, there is no place for a woman.
The brutal gang rape of a 23-year-old girl on her way home from a movie triggered an awakening that took many by surprise. The first 2 who've been arrested produced in court this afternoon. The girl is is now on a ventilator, battling for life. Apart from Ram Singh and his brother Mukesh, who was driving the bus, 4 other men have been detained.
Juvenile accused among the 6 arrested for the gang rape and torture.
According to the latest government figures, 1 woman is now raped in India every 20 minutes.
ज्योति सोती थी तो आँख खींचती थी, तब कहती मम्मी मम्मी।
ताली कभी एक हाथ से नहीं बजती, दोनों हाथों से बजती है। और कोई शरीफ लड़की होती है रात को 9 बजे मतलब नहीं घूमती। जितनी 15-20 मिनट गाड़ी चली है, मैंने चलाई थी। लाइटें बंद कर दी थी उन्होंने। भाई था मैं, जिस लड़की को मारा था जाके उसी के बीच में छूट गया बस। लड़की चिल्ला रही है बचाओ बचाओ, भाई की आ रही थी गाड़ी में तो चलाता रही है। भाई को फिर मारपीट के पीछे ले गए, हाथ आ जा रहे थे बारी बारी से जुनाइल और राम सिंह।
Let's pause it there just because of the buffering.
बाकी बाद में अक्षय वगैरह ये सब गए थे।
Pause there. Yeah, just for the buffering. Okay, let's try again. Okay, let's bring the lights up and pause at that point. We've got a general sense of the trailer for the moment, and if it comes back up later. So, just give us the timescales of when the film was kind of devised on the back of the case. So, when did you start the filming project?
It was started in August 2013. So it was 8 months after the case, because this took place in December 2012. And it was after one of the rapists had committed suicide, Ram Singh, who was the ringleader. And his brother is the one that we feature on the film. We only featured one of the interviews because they pretty much said the same thing. And there was no point, it wasn't a film about the a rapist alone, it was about giving a general view about why it had happened. And Mukesh, who was Ram's brother, described the events. And unfortunately, we weren't able to get the interview with the boy, her friend who was on the bus with her, because he wanted to be paid. So that he was the only other person that could provide us with what happened on that night, and the only account we do have is of Mukesh's.
Cool. Okay, let's move on to Patrick for a moment, and then we'll come back to each project. So Patrick sits in a slightly different seat because you are representing a distributor here. So we're going to look at Blackfish as an example. So when did you come across this film? How did you acquire it? And what rights were available, and what was your role when you came onto this project?
Sure. As Sarah mentioned, working for Dogwolf, we do two main activities: distribution in the UK and international sales worldwide. The distribution activities have been going for about a bit over 10 years, and international sales is a new thing. The acquisition of Blackfish for Dogwolf was a very major move. It happened in the 2013 Sundance Film Festival. We came across this film at that festival, which is one that we attend with a lot of attention, and determined that this film Blackfish was going to be something that we knew how to bring to audiences, very much so in the UK, but also represent globally. So it was there at Sundance that we made, I guess, a bid for it to handle the rights and to handle the distribution. And that involved that sort of move in terms of the The decision to take this on also involved getting external investors on board, because as far as documentaries go, you know, there are loads of films that have relatively limited theatrical potential and digital potential, and then there are some very big mainstream docs, and you know, this film, Blackfish, we were confident that it was going to be something that we could really take to audiences worldwide. And so, yeah, that was when we did the acquisition to then handle all the international sales and UK distribution for it.
And who were the partners already, in which territories were already gone at this point? Who were already involved?
So at the time, the only territory that was tied up was North America, which was being handled by Magnolia Pictures. And the rest we did worldwide sales for, so subsequently represented the film to sell it in, I'm pretty sure, every territory. That was kind of where it was at.
Cool. Let's watch a quick trailer for Blackfish as well.
When you look into their eyes, you know somebody is home.
They're an animal that possesses great spiritual power, not to be meddled with.
Orange County Sheriff's Office. We need SO to respond for a dead person at SeaWorld. A whale has eaten one of the trainers.
Telecombo is the one that went after her. Dawn is the senior trainer here at Shamu Stadium.
She captured what it means to be a SeaWorld trainer, that it made me realize what happened to her really could have happened to anyone.
I've been expecting somebody to be killed by Telecom.
We weren't told much about it, other than it was trainer error.
It didn't just happen. It's not a singular event. You have to go back to understand this.
The speedboat herded them in, and they could just pick out the young ones.
This is the worst thing that I've ever done.
When Telecom arrived at SeaWorld,
He was twice as large as the next animal.
We stored these whales in what we call a module, which was 20 feet across and 30 feet deep, and the lights were all turned out.
Probably led to what I think is a psychosis.
All whales in captivity are all psychologically traumatized. It's not just Telecom.
If you were in a bathtub for 25 years, don't you think you'd get a little psychotic?
Dawn would tell you that it was her mistake.
They blamed her.
It's just a bold-faced lie.
I was just instructed to get rid of the tape.
the industry has a vested interest in spinning these. That sells a lot of Shamu dolls. It sells a lot of tickets at the gate.
There's no record of an orca doing any harm in the wild.
That's an excellent trailer in the way it kind of presents. Yeah, big clap for Blackfish. Very good. So kind of rousing the audience to really look at it as like a thriller and kind of like an uncovering of a secret and what happened. And because the film does play out like that very well. So I think this trailer, were you guys editing the trailer or did that come as part of the package?
That came with the producer.
With the filmmakers. So now that you have an introduction of the projects, what I want to break down as we go through is kind of the structures of how each campaign kind of rolled out. And as we look at each film, it's looking at kind of the commercial and kind of traditional distribution options that were considered, and then the kind of purely impact side that was looked at. So Patrick kind of represents a distributor that's unique in a sense that you do impact side work around the kind of films, but always bringing it back to kind of the commercial objectives because you are a traditional distributor, which is there. Whereas the other two examples had a mixture of a kind of being funded by broadcasters on the outset and having kind of more kind of top level impact goals that you were going for, so a slightly different strategy. So I want to just start by highlighting each of you what your kind of principal goals were in terms of what you wanted the films to achieve if your impact goal kind of was realised. So what was your kind of mission statement for the film as it came out?
I mean, our mission statement, I mean, ultimately was to try and get the UN to get an international inquiry and to put these crimes on the agenda and to have them investigated. And to some extent, to some extent, we achieved that. That is still ongoing. I think there was an interesting thing, though, journalistically, that we had to do, which was that when I made the TV programs, they were straightforward TV programs. When I decided that we needed to make a sort of feature doc which we could use as a campaigning document, as a campaigning film, we still had very clear journalistic issues to discuss, and that affected very much the funding. Because to make this film, well, first of all, I had to go to, although I'd made the first 2 TV docs, I had to go to Channel 4 and ITN Productions and say, look, you know, you own the copyright on the films that I made. Now, a lot of the material wasn't copyright in the sense that it was material filmed by survivors and indeed lots of people who died during the war. And an awful lot of it as well was filmed by the perpetrators of the war crimes. So there was no argument about the copyright over that. No one was going to sue us and say, I own the copyright on this evidence of me committing war crimes. But on the other hand, we had a very important journalistic decision to make, which was that we would not let people with an agenda, I mean, much as we would like to, because we desperately needed the money, we would not let people with an agenda help fund the film and make the film and fund the making of the film. So we went to places like BritDoc, and we had lots of support from foundations and various people. It was a long campaign to raise the money. Channel 4 and ITN Productions gave us the footage, gave us the rights to the footage for a nominal, for a sum which they would get back a return on if there was a profit, which of course everyone knew there wasn't going to be a profit. But we did fund the film entirely independently. I mean, lots of the Tamil diaspora would have been very keen to fund that film, to help fund it, and we decided that we would not, take any money from people who had an agenda, if you like. Then when we launched the campaign, we said that's fine. We can now raise funds through Kickstarter, through all sorts of collections and initiatives that we ran, because they were funding a campaign to get a film seen, which we had made, with demonstrable journalistic independence, if you see what I mean.
Awesome. If we break down just the kind of key sentence right at the top of that was to get the UN to launch an investigation. That sounds like such like a throwaway thing. Let's just get the UN to launch this thing. How hard and how difficult and how much work did it take to work out how you would actually achieve that?
I don't think any of us expected to achieve what we did achieve. I think there's a danger of overstating what we achieved as well. And it's still an ongoing campaign, and there's been developments in the last 2 days which are quite disturbing. And the campaign is still going on in effect. I mean, in a sense, what we had, the situation you had in Sri Lanka was that an absolute denial of everything that we were saying. When we produced the film, we were accused of faking the evidence, inventing the evidence. Every time we tried to show the film, they tried to ban it. I mean, we organised various tours, and interestingly, we didn't have a distributor really until about 2 years in. And without naming the name of that distributor, who is certainly not represented here, they sold it to one country for £3,000, and that's the entire thing we got for distribution. So there's a big lesson there, which perhaps we can discuss. But every time we tried to show the film, the Sri Lankan government tried to ban it. We had every time we showed it. I went on the tour of Australia, various New Zealand with the film. They tried to ban it there. They tried to stop Parliament showing it. They tried to stop the European Parliament showing it. They tried to stop the UN Human Rights Council showing it. When we went to Malaysia, they persuaded the Malaysian government, the Sri Lankan government, persuaded the Malaysian government to raid the screening. I was actually there, and I was kind of smuggled out. They 40 officers from came and raided the screening. I was kind of bundled out the back. I felt a bit bad about that, but that's what the organisers wanted me to do, so I agreed. Because you can't say no, I'm staying and being a hero. But one of the women who had organised that was arrested, Lena Henry, and she is currently on trial. And faces technically, I mean, she's hoping she won't get it, but she's technically facing 3 years in jail for showing this film, even though the government, which tried to get the film banned, is now gone. When I said I was going to Sri Lanka for the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting, I got endless death threats and I got things like, come to Sri Lanka and we'll have a white van to meet you. It was one of the white vans are the kidnapping devices where people have disappeared. And come to Sri Lanka and we'll take you to meet Lasanta, who is the editor of the Sunday, I forgot what it's called.
Sunday Leader.
Sorry? Sunday Leader, who was assassinated on the street after he'd written a series of articles just criticising the triumphalism as the war came to its end. So there was, and in Nepal they banned the screen. They managed to get a screening called at the Southeast Asia Film Festival. So there was huge attempts to ban the film and to stop the film being seen. But the trouble was and they constantly said that everything was fake. But the trouble is that because, and this was another thing which is curious about our films, is we've never stopped making it. We keep getting more and more evidence, so that when we said in the first cut of the film that Balachandran, this 12-year-old child, had been executed, they said no, he was killed in crossfire. And then we got photographs of him in captivity alive, and then photographs of him dead. And in captivity in government custody. The same with Isse Priya, the Tamil Tiger newsreader, who we alleged, we had photographs of her dead, and we alleged and said in the first cut of the film that she had clearly been executed. They said this is an absolute lie, she was caught in crossfire. And then subsequently, after we made the first cut of the film, we got footage showing her being captured alive, and then subsequently got even more photographs of her showing her in custody with her hands tied behind her back, and then more photographs of her dead. And so we were able to demonstrate, point by point by point, every time they came out and said something's a lie, we were able to come back and actually remade the film. And we last remade the film about 3 months ago, changing bits to update it with what's happening.
How long do you think you've been working on this project so far?
I mean, off and on, I've been working on it for 4 years. I mean, I've made a few other films, sort of, because I need to earn money, and you don't make a lot of money out of this kind of thing. I made a film just recently about a British jewellery company, which is, I have to word this carefully, responsible, some would say indirectly, some might allege directly responsible for the deaths of 18 miners in Mozambique who are mining illegally on what they regard, well, what the miners regard as their land, because it's where they used to live, but what this British company now regards as theirs. So a few other films in the meantime.
But about 4 years of time. So what's really interesting in the kind of no-fire zone case is this conversation around kind of what distribution options were there. So it's kind of saying there wasn't any distributor involved in this project until 2 years later. This was essentially the film team running absolutely everything they needed to run, and a very kind of hard-working sense. So going on screening tours in multiple countries, being attacked, kind of freedom of press, kind of aspects about not being able to travel certain places, banning of screenings, having screening hosts being put in jail, and then trying to coordinate support to try and get them out. There's a very strong kind of personal obligation towards this story that your team have, especially with the act of kind of re-editing the film as you get further updates. So when you're considering kind of impact campaigns that you might be having for your own projects, it's very important to consider how kind of important you are as the filmmaker in that story and who's going to be leading on the work. So this is kind of part of Callum's life for 4 years of time, because that's how long this type of change will take. Changing something at the UN level is very, very difficult, and you need sustained kind of influence and press and kind of publicity going through, and high-profile screenings and in-person conversations and lots of dialogue to make those things happen, because it's a very slow kind of burner. So when you're looking at your own projects and analysing what you can do, you have to take into that consideration that this could be quite a strong part of your being for a very, very long time if you have a film in this vein. So coming to really about India's Daughter, so before you came up with the concept of the kind of educational NGO, because that was kind of later, when you started with the film, kind of what did you think your mission goal was? What was the thing that you thought you were doing with the project?
The mission goal was to start discussion about violence against women, because it's something that, you know, people are too afraid to talk about. There's a stigma associated with rape victims. There's a shame that's adhered to rape. You bring shame onto your family if you talk about it. There's a grueling process that women have to go through if they have been raped, particularly, you know, when they go to report it. You know, in instances when we were filming India's Daughter, some of the policemen had said, you know, there have been cases where women go to the police station to report rape, and are raped at the police station for reporting. And it's not just in India that it happens, but also that is an extreme case in extreme cases. But even here, for example, you know, in courts, it could take up to years, months, years, and you know, again and again, the women are questioned. They've got to go through a very, very vigorous process before anything really happens. And in most cases, it doesn't. You know, 60% of cases don't end up going to trial at all. So that's one of the things that we wanted to do, was to use this film and start screenings in countries around the world to open up the conversation. This was something that India had, you know, they were a great example of this, that they said, look, enough is enough. We're coming out on the streets and we're fighting for our rights. And men and women came out to do that. So our aim was to partner with NGOs who were trying to do similar things. So we've partnered with Plan UK, Plan India, Magic Bus, Care International, and there were several NGOs that we were working with. And the campaign we wanted to start off in India, but of course, like with your film, the Indian government banned our film without seeing it, because at the time it wasn't released. There was a trailer that was put out on NDTV where it was going to be shown a few days later. As soon as it hit their screens, they said there was a knee-jerk reaction. On Twitter, they started a hate campaign. A group called Times Now group in India, they said Nirbhaya, hashtag Nirbhaya insulted, which then took over Twitter, and they said we're insulting and bringing shame to the modesty of the woman by making a film about her case. So that went on for a while, but we do, you know, luckily we've been lucky in the sense that we haven't had any issues with the government trying to stop the film being shown anywhere else. And we wouldn't stop anyway. We would continue to do so. And we do. We take it from country to country. Leslie, the producer, director on this, we split our time and we just go everywhere and anywhere possible to start discussion. And women and men come up to us. And there's men who come up and say, you know, it's worrying that we have these thoughts that the rapists and the lawyers are talking about, and we're worried. So what can we do? And it's a good place to start and say, we do need help to do this. We need help to try and stop these thoughts before they manifest into something which leads into a horrific case like this. So that was our initial aim, and then it led to something even bigger. We try to do both. We go to women's groups, we go to universities, we go to schools, and try to use educational tools to try and, you know, encourage people to come and talk to us afterwards, which they do in most cases. So that's.
So there's a number of things there to kind of unpick, really. So when you're kind of looking at these areas, the first thing to establish is kind of what's your kind of issue area that you're looking at. So what's the kind of central theme of the film? So there's a number of things that come out of all of these films. Looking at multiple aspects. So what are your kind of like head ideas, what are the big themes you're looking at, and then what's a particular goal that is inherited kind of within that. Now what you've got here is a difference of a film set in Sri Lanka about a Sri Lankan issue, but you needed worldwide kind of awareness of this to make any change, versus a film set in India about an Indian case, but reflected an issue that was happening in other countries around the world. So rape against kind of women is kind of rife in a number of places, and kind of being believed as a woman is kind of happening all around the world. So you then have a film that has application in other countries and other geographical areas, using that case study. So it's really important to kind of look at the issue in the film that you're working on and seeing, does it have application in other countries, and what can it achieve in those areas, and what might you need to adapt in your impact planning to make it relevant for that country you're going to. So a lot of times when I'm speaking with filmmakers, sometimes they film something in country. There was a program I was chatting to about a Japanese story, and they'd had this whole plan for what they would do in the UK and America because they're the big territories and that's what would pay the most money. They had no plan whatsoever for the country where the film was set, and yet that was what the film was about, was a particular issue in that country. So make sure that you're getting geographical relevance for what your subject can do inside and outside of the country where it's filmed across the world. So Patrick, when you took on Blackfish, was there any kind of briefing from the team about what they wanted to achieve? So you'd obviously have in your mindset a commercial objective of kind of making money in different platforms and where it was. So when you kind of looked at the film as Dogwoof, what did you see its kind of potential commercially? And did the team brief you on what their impact goal was, what they wanted to do with the film when you took it on?
Yeah, sure. I guess with that, talking between a sort of, say, set of commercial objectives and then a set of impact or something separate. When a filmmaker and a producer come to us and essentially hand over the rights to the film and entrust us to represent the film in a commercial context, in a commercial way, we are then incentivized in the way that we operate as a commercial distributor to maximize the audience for the film in a commercial way, using the existing networks, the relationships, and the sort of savvy we know from doing this, over 100 films by now, which is in tandem with the goal of getting exposure for the film, essentially where the marketing machine for the film. So often anything we're doing to get publicity for the film, to get the film packaged in a way and positioned in a way where people are going to be talking about it, where people are going to be sharing it, where it gets put into arenas where there's sort of a lot of mainstream focus, so traditional press outlets, so getting it in Time Out, getting it in the main newspapers on the Metro, that kind of stuff. That's kind of our focus is, we're going to do everything we can to make as big a noise about this film as possible, and then keep fueling that fire so that people are, that audience becomes a growing organism, which, goes hand in hand with the issue, which is at the core of the film, which is the welfare of these animals. And so as that story unfolded, with what was kind of happening with the impact of the film, so this so-called Blackfish effect, where, people started talking about SeaWorld, and musicians started cancelling concerts, and American politicians started proposing bills, and stock prices started crashing, and then there were publicity statements. I mean, we're taking what's going on the impact front and sort of feeding it back into a campaign that, as our core as distributors, is about still just growing that audience. So using these stories to sort of say, hey, this is happening, by the way, have you seen the film? So I guess the sort of way that our communications thought process is around is keeping the film in the core of the story as it unfolds, so that the story doesn't sort of run away in a different direction, and that the film remains sort of part of that, because that's the journey that it kind of goes on. So an example would be, we were managing the website, the international website, blackfishmovie.com, and we would, the people working at Dogwoof have background in sort of e-commerce, and we're very much focused on online business, and conscious that people are, very, very, a lot of things are competing for their attention, and we want to make it that when a film is out, that it's being presented in a way that they can find out, okay, what's going on, why should I watch this, and then as easy as possible how to watch this. So having very good websites that have links to where they can find the film on, whether it's in cinemas, that, we're not just like, okay, it's in cinemas now, full stop. It's like, this word is hyperlinked, and here's where the cinemas are, and we're checking every few days to making sure that, are the things on sale then? Because we don't want to lose people after a few clicks. So very, very conscious about how many clicks it takes for people to find the film. So I guess, getting people to see it as well as making it as easy as possible sort of go hand in hand when you partner with a distributor that's sort of commercially minded. I don't know if that's a too roundabout an answer, but...
No, that's good. So it's kind of like a circular motion, like more people who see it will hear about the issue, and then the more the issue gets discussed, the more people are wanting to see it, and then you're kind of channeling it back and forth as it went through.
Yeah, and also like championing the triumphs of the film and using that. So when the film does well and has these sort of small milestones of impact or things that kind of happen, we're really happy about that, and also cleverly using that to then get more people tweeting and more people talking, and everything sort of packaged in a way that is not only shareable, because that's how it gets out, and that's how something becomes a viral phenomenon, is making it good images, short content, that kind of stuff, And then also that there's links back to the film so that those new people who haven't heard about it will find it, because there's no, the thing that gets our goat the most is when, there's a great anecdote about a film or a piece of information about the film that goes out that has no bloody link to the film. It's just like, ugh. It's not what a waste, it's great, but it's so nice when you see it happen when it's able, so that someone who's hearing this for the first time is going to find their way to the film quickly. And that's me talking very much with a distributor's hat on. That's how we think.
Did you have a comment on that?
Well, I was just going to say, yeah, I mean, in a sense, I feel a bit guilty now about what I was saying about our distribution efforts, because in a sense, we were the worst enemy of anybody who's trying to distribute a film. I mean, for example, when India banned it, Malaysia banned it and arrested one of the organisers of a screening, and Nepal banned it. Our response was, we immediately did this press release and said, right, in Malaysia, India and Nepal, the film is, as of now, completely freely available for anyone to watch on the internet.
We should have done that. we hired someone to take down the links because we were actively saying, right, it's banned in India, we should take it down. But in fact, by the time that we got around to doing that, 1 million Indians had already seen it.
Yeah.
It's difficult to ban anything in digital age anyway, and it works against them. It publicises it even more, which I don't know if that was.
Well, I mean, the thing is, in terms of what you're talking about, tweets and sort of media things. I mean, we had incredible publicity. I mean, you might say with friends like these, but a week before Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting. When Cameron was going out to talk to take part in the Commonwealth Heads of Government, which was held in Sri Lanka, ironically, he tweeted a week before he went, just watched, no, this is probably going to come to more than 140 characters, but anyway, it was something like, just watched at No Fire Zone movie, so our Twitter handle, some of the most shocking images I have seen. I will have serious questions to ask President Rajapaksa next week. And he did it at President Rajapaksa, so it was actually sort of, I mean, you couldn't pay for that in a million years. But actually, we weren't geared up really to try and capitalise on that in terms of getting people to watch it. I mean, it was on Vimeo or something. I can't remember where it was at that time.
So on that, let's just talk a little bit about team members and team responsibilities then, because when you're saying kind of like we're not geared up to do that and kind of to react to that, let's just have a brief chat about who kind of was on your team and what their specific roles were in terms of the campaign rollout. So who did you have for No Fire Zone to start with?
We had, it was a very, very small team. Once the film went out, we got huge support from BritDoc and from Bertha, and huge support from the Tamil diaspora, and support from a lot of sort of, people like that. In terms of our team, within 3 months of the film being finished, it was me. There's nobody else. My company is run from an office in my house. But we'd had Joe Natasakara, who then went on to be a co-producer on Varunga. So we had sort of lots of good, talented people, but we didn't have any staff at all within a few months. So. To be honest, I think I've learned a lot of lessons about how we would do it next time. I think a lot of what we did was absolutely right. A lot of what we did had absolutely unquestionable, enormous impact. But I think that we'd probably do it better next time.
And how about you? What was your team size for India Salter?
During the campaign of the film, it was myself and Leslie. And working from Leslie's home. So it did whittle down. And our team that we were filming with, they were based in India. So when we flew back, it was just Leslie and myself, and we sat there. And just like yourself, we didn't really think about how to monetize. And we thought, okay, it's out there. We just want to get it out there. And in the end, I think we broke even, but you don't really make anything out of it.
Who did you have doing your press, or how did the press come around? Was that BBC?
We've actually got a distribution company that's still working for us. They sell it to territories for broadcast on television, and they are continuously doing that. So it's been sold in. I don't have any idea of the numbers now, but I think it's definitely over 20 countries now. So they are, we hound them a bit, but they are doing that. But on the campaign side of things, we, Leslie and I just take the film out, we go and hold the screenings, we organise the screenings, and we go and talk at them. In terms of the NGO, we've now hired, an education director who's writing the global curriculum, because of course you need a panel of experts doing that, and we've got patrons and committee members that we've, Leslie actually just gets on a plane and just gate crashes these education conferences without a badge, and she calls saving the world without a badge. So she'll go in, and she's very, very persuasive. So she'll talk herself into anything. She talked herself into the prison to interview the rapist. So she's been going in, and as of now, we've got 27 countries who've adopted the curriculum as part of their national curriculum on a compulsory basis. So, and it's very new. We've only started this up in May, so it's very, very new.
So on that line, I'll come back to team in a second for Patrick, because you have a full team in your office. But there's a question there about kind of like partnerships and access. So a lot of people who kind of move into kind of the impact world, they kind of talk about partnerships and kind of working in partnership with people. And effectively what they then do is just send them a proposed tweet, or say like, here's a Facebook link, which is not essentially working in partnership with an organisation. So it's kind of looking at who's working in your kind of sphere of influence, who are the organisations who are already talking about this, what are they already campaigning on, and how can you work collaboratively. So the fact with the NGO, you've got kind of UN backing, there's a kind of a whole situation of kind of sustainable development goals that kind of come behind that. There's a kind of slotting into a kind of a preset motion of stuff that's happening. And then there's other times where you're breaking new ground and nobody's talking about this, and you have to try and excite people to kind of get on board with your project. But Leslie kind of rocking up at an educational conference, you're bringing them a kind of unique, interesting kind of aspect that they may not have considered before.
Absolutely. So. And also with India's Daughter, we ran an Oscar campaign, and we had huge supporters behind us, Meryl Streep, Susan Sarandon, and they really did help in trying to get this initiative known too. And actually Meryl Streep is one of the patrons on ESCI, which we call it for short. So it does help in terms of the support that we get. Coldplay tweeted out, but we really, we did have a PR team working. We got this Oscar campaign funded, and during that period we really took full advantage, because we did have a team at that point, and we said, look, let's go with it and let's try to get, because our end goal was, we've made this film, but now what? And we wanted to really shed light on this and not just leave it as, okay, we may or may not get nominated for the Oscars, which we didn't, but at least it did bring this forward into the limelight, which is what we aim to do. And I think we were kind of successful.
It's definitely
I should mention that we had a PR team as well, Sophie Tomazis, who was incredibly supportive actually, and sort of worked for far less than she should have done.
And how long?
Would be done project by project. So we'd hire for one particular initiative, like the making the film available in those Asian countries, and she did sort of publicity and so did very intense and very effective publicity, but in little bursts, which was all we could afford.
Cost-effective way of doing it. So Patrick, from your side, as a kind of set-up office or distributor, can you just give a very quick summary of the members of the team who would work on a project like this, and what would be their specific goals in terms of if they're just looking at the traditional distribution aspects, or who kind of crosses over into what we say is the impact side?
Yeah, sure. So we have a staff member dedicated to publicity, a publicist. That means they are getting the film represented and exposure in traditional press outlets, newspapers, key online websites, TV, radio, sort of mainstream media. So our publicist maintains relationships with the people who are writing and reporting on this stuff, and makes sure that they've seen the film and then they're ready to report on it on the right moment. We have a full-time social media manager, have had for a long time. Before Blackfish, Dogwoof was always a distributor who gave that a full-time role. So Emma Green was the person who was doing the social media for the campaign, and I think deserves a lot of credit for her extreme professionalism in this this area. So she was, the social media manager's objective is to keep the conversation online about the film alive, often balancing content that is always being shareable, that is sort of new and interesting, and then content that is getting people to the page where the film is screening or the page where people can access the film. Making, so that's making, that's copywriting, and that also is feeding into website copywriting, so turning everything into a blog, every development, and making sure that that's all consistently up to date and perpetually being shared by the right partners. My role, so I'm the distribution manager at Dogwolf, which I do a bunch of stuff. With me and the head of distribution, we do obviously cinema sales, getting the film booked into cinemas. So it acts as a real shop window for the film, gets people talking. Even if people don't go to the cinema, they'll hear that it's there and then they'll know that about the film and it'll be on their radar. So we're getting the film into cinemas. I'm also doing a lot of work with partnerships. Like you say, not just here's a tweet, can you please retweet, but rather setting up meetings with key organizations that are going to champion the film. So groups like Greenpeace, groups like, in the case of Blackfish, Born Free Foundation, Whale and Dolphin Conservation, PETA UK, other marine groups, making sure that they are in the fold early on, and that, when you're bringing a new project to them, it might take a matter of weeks or months to get them to firstly see it, and then a conversation about what do you guys want to do together around the film. So I'm managing those sorts of partnerships, and then again coordinating it all in the moment, and then just getting outreach from wherever the film's playing, making sure that those cinema screenings are supported. Additionally, we have in-house graphic designer who's doing the artwork for the film, and that's digital and print. We have a web developer. Then we have a home entertainment sales manager. That title is involving, later on when the film is on those key digital platforms, this person is maintaining a relationship with, key digital platforms like Amazon, iTunes, Netflix. At the time of Blackfish, there was like Blinkbox and a bunch of others. And that's about regularly meeting with these platforms, which we have direct relationships with. Like we don't go through any other aggregator. And explaining to them and bringing them up to speed on the campaign, and sort of making a case for why this film is hot right now. And then when they're making decisions on what should go on the front page of new films on iTunes or the flow case, and those things are a conversation that happens with us and and those platforms. So someone's doing that. And then the campaign is sort of overseen by Ollie, who's the head of distribution, who we're meeting all the time as a team and talking about where to align it. And of course our CEO, Anna, is also super involved, and we have a very kind of open approach to the film campaigns where we are talking and everyone knows what everyone else is doing. So that's the UK campaign, and then separately to that, we have, sorry, I know you asked for a really short answer, but
it's
I
very
don't
interesting,
want
Patrick.
to leave anyone out because everyone's important. On the international sales side, so UK distribution is sort of one arm of Dogwolf, and then the international sales side has some staff. So one of whom is focusing on festivals. So in that first kind of year and a half where the film gets divvied up the territories and sold and marketed into all the territories, someone's making sure that they're attending all those key festivals that also simultaneously act as markets for other international distributor buyers, broadcast buyers, on other buyers in other territories, and then a person who's representing the film for the kind of broadcasters and distributors who will do acquisitions of the film from us as a sales agent. So selling it to, say, for example, Arte in Europe, and other distributors like Madman in Australia, and then they have support staff. So that's a sort of rundown of the crew.
Good. So good to get that rundown, because there's a lot of people involved. So sometimes it's done by one individual human, and sometimes it's done by 10 people. And it's really useful to have a consideration of what those different job roles are. Because if you are anticipating to do this by yourself, there's a lot of ground you have to cover. Like, that is literally like 10 full-time jobs that were covered in one film that help make it so successful and kind of drive that forward.
Important to emphasize the fact that we do like 15 to 20 films per year. So like you say, if you're a one-man team, one-woman team, you have to do this, of course, a lot. We're sort of doing this for Blackfish, but also for other films, which is important to emphasize, I think.
And also, you know, like I had lots of people who were helping out, and you know, there's a guy called Mark who I work with who does an awful lot of stuff, and has been very, you know, so but it isn't just me.
We also have volunteers and people who lend a helping hand
coming through. Yeah. So, because when you're thinking about kind of budgeting for this work, it's kind of a key thing. So you mentioned that you had to seek an outside investor to help you acquire the film at Sundance. But there's a rise in what we now call the kind of campaign outreach funding. So BritDoc has a Connect fund, which anybody can apply to if you have a film that you think is going to have this kind of social change. And it's rather than thinking about just a film that has won Sundance or just a film that's definitely on Channel 4, the aspect of outreach funding now is kind of brokered into kind of how can your particular film be used in whatever context is required. So you've got kind of three very different examples of how a film can kind of come out. But these funders are looking for your change objectives, not kind of, if I give you 50 grand, will you definitely make 50 grand in cinemas to pay me back, which probably won't happen for a long time.
We had an initial funding from Worldview and also Gucci Tribeca.
So you had to pay them back, or was that grant-based?
No, that was grant.
So it's a really strong consideration in this area. So for those who aren't very clear on kind of funding your doc, let alone funding your outreach, it's lots of things to consider. So if you have any funders in the mix of your film that do require money back, that are equity funders, you do have to have these commercial considerations in mind, because if you do just give the film away for free to everybody, those investors are really not going to be happy with what you're doing. But on the flip side, you might be able to get alternative sources of money into your film, because what they're interested in is that change perspective. So if you can present to them, like, this is the film we're making and this is what we want to do with it afterwards, and this is the change we want to achieve, they may be more enticed to potentially fund the film and or the campaign around it. But thinking about that campaign budget early on is really critical, because you need to have some resources available at the time at which the film kind of will be coming out. Can we bring up the Blackfish poster? Sorry to come back to Patrick again, but can you just list out the assets that, as a filmmaker, kind of, you want to launch your film, you want to get it out there. This is the kind of bugbear that I get with most filmmakers. They have nothing ready. So it's like, we finished the film, woohoo! And I'm like, have you got anything ready that I can promote your film with? And it's like, there's nothing there. So as a distributor, kind of, what do you like to see from the film team? Yeah. And then what is it that you help them create, or if they have the skills, what can they help create themselves? So can we black out the room for a second just so we can see the poster? Because it is very black, so we're just looking at a Blackfish one. Okay, so if you just want to see this poster to start off with, so this was one that you guys designed, or
Yes.
did this come from the film team?
I mean, the graphic element was there, but we took ownership of making this poster and signing off on it, and putting it out there. I don't know. I don't want to talk in the dark.
That's cool. Bring the lights back up. It's just a bit eerie, isn't it?
You guys all saw it now. I mean, I wanted to bring this poster in as an example with the film Blackfish, because I guess the thing about it and other successful theatrical documentaries, and there's a whole discussion around this, is the way they're kind of borrowing from other genres. This film being presented as a thriller or a horror or a psychological thriller definitely works in its favor. There's no denying that with the way that this film was positioned and the campaign conversation that we had in terms of how are we going to bring this to audiences was, yes, by all means, absolutely work with activist organizations, work with Greenpeace, work with PETA, bring them into the fold, make sure that the film is with those networks for them to champion, because it's core to what they're doing. But at the same time, simultaneously make decisions that will make the film as accessible as possible to as wide a possible audience, so that people who could potentially be put off by certain quotes or certain positioning, that this is a really heavy-going animal rights, talking headsy type film, will not be, those people will not be lost. And so this imaging, this minimalism, this style of poster, and also, I guess, style of trailer that you saw earlier, is presenting it in a way that's very much like not necessarily your classic documentary, but rather something that you wouldn't necessarily distinguish it so much from a fiction piece. That kind of we were doing things around the release like, let's do a double bill with Jaws at the Prince Charles. Like that's a great idea to sort of align the film with that, and then it's sort of being something, oh, like this can be entertaining or gripping or whatever. So to get to your question of what did we want from the filmmaker, and this applies to Blackfish but applies to generally, is that you know, in that distributors, we're so much dealing with selling a film before people see it. I mean, often the thing you say about a film which is different to many other products, like a car that you can take for a test drive before you buy it, or an item of clothing that you can try on, this sweater, and decide if you like it or not. A film is something that people will commit to paying for before they see it. So the little bit that you give them has to be honest, because you'll get backlash if it's not, but also it needs to be really, really good and really, really gripping. So, you know, whilst the bulk, for those of you who've seen Blackfish, there is a lot of kind of talking heads in there, but the trailer is very condensed into the, you know, the most action-packed bits of it. You see this in other films like, you know, Chasing Ice, the environmental documentary about glaciers melting, or there are others that are kind of doing this quite cleverly. Is, you know, so for the filmmakers, it's like, what images do you have that are strong, that are in, you know, high resolution, that can be made into good artwork, you know, layered Photoshop files that can be switched around to suit a variety of marketing formats, whether it's posters or whether it's online stuff, but that's you know, obviously already ready to go and useful. And then on the video aspect, I guess, is when you're putting together your trailer or your teaser, and now more and more Dogwolf's working with filmmakers at the earlier stage, you know, treatment stage, putting together a treatment. What teaser stuff do you have so we can start taking this to buyers to have this conversation really early before it's had any kind of festival premiere. And it's, you know, there's got to be a bit of action to it. There's got to be a bit of drama. There's got to be a bit of excitement, because we want to simultaneously put this film out as a piece of entertainment to be consumed as much as a issue that's going to be topical because it's important. I mean, they're not mutually exclusive.
I just want to look back a little bit in terms of kind of, you've got your marketing assets, you're getting your voice out there, and you need influencers. So really, you kind of mentioned Meryl Streep kind of coming on board. How do you start, so from you kind of with that celebrity kind of angle, and then for Callum with kind of politicians, how do you even start that dialogue in terms of kind of, you want them to endorse or support your project and the campaign you're running? How do you enter that conversation? Kind of what routes are you going into to get those influencers, because ultimately they'll help spread that word?
Well, we started with their agents. Meryl Streep, we were introduced, there was a chain, so Alan Rickman was a very good friend of Leslie's. He introduced us to Emma Thompson, and Emma Thompson then put us in touch with Meryl Streep. So there was there was some connections there that got us there. But we did a screening in Cannes Film Festival, and we wanted a good name behind the film, which in the end we weren't able to get, but we did our best. And the only way we did that was to find the agent and email. And we have been successful in terms of the Oscar campaign. Susan Sarandon, for example, who we just emailed, and you wait, and they generally do respond back. The agent's good, they respond back. If you can try to find a direct contact, is the easiest way to go about it. But generally, you want to keep it short and concise, because you can imagine they're very busy. So you say, look, this is the idea of the film, and here's a short trailer. We also send them the link of the film to say, if you like the trailer and if you've got time, the film is 63 minutes long, here's a link for it. And more often than not, we've had a good response, and we always get a response back, whether they can or they cannot, and we'll try to pursue the conversation. So if they can't make it to they couldn't make it to the Cannes Film Festival, we said, look, can you do this Oscar campaign for us? And we always kept the conversation alive and that connection going. We wouldn't bug them, but if we needed something, we would just say, would it be okay if we emailed at a later date? And they would say, yeah, sure, fire away, And it's just, we always, anytime we've got anything, it's just a matter of finding who is at the top that we can get in touch with. We don't try, we don't think, well, we'll email the general email address. We just go straight to the top and we try our luck that way. There's a lot of Googling. If you Google, you can find almost anyone's contact details nowadays. So
totally true. And how about you? Because you had a much more kind of politician's perspective.
Well, I mean, we did. We had, on the other hand, we had Rufus Sewell, who did the commentary for nothing. We had MIA, who gave us the title track for nothing, and constantly spoke about the film and tweeted about it.
And just explain the relationship, why MIA that was important.
Well, because
for those who don't know,
she's a Tamil refugee originally and comes from Sri Lanka, so it's very close to her heart. And she's been really supportive of the film. But I suppose it's a funny kind of thing, because our film was, on the one hand, our film was a clearly political film, trying to talk to power and trying to take on power, basically. On the other hand, we also had to do this whole film thing, and so it was essential that the film was good. It was essential that the film was winning awards and had that kind of credibility, and I mean, and it did win awards, and it was nominated for an Emmy, and it was nominated for Grierson and so on. Didn't win either of them, but there we go.
Got nominated.
Got nominated, and it won, quite a few awards at various film festivals. So you have, and so we were doing two things at once, really. I mean, we were marketing the film as a film, as a not work of art, but I mean, as a good, powerful film, which I like to think it is. But we were also sort of speaking truth to power at the same time, and that's a very, very different kind of project. And I suppose that the thing that's when you make a film, I mean, the thing is, because it's journalism, and when you make a film and you're trying to work out how you position that film as a piece of journalism, and how you position that journalism as a campaign, which is, I mean, my attitude is very much the BBC will, the official. I was always brought up. I started off as a print journalist and ended up I started off as trained as a painter, actually, but then I ended up being a print journalist, and. I then ended up being a television journalist and then a television director, and there's a fetish that the BBC will use, which is this notion of impartiality, which is that you must be impartial. Now, I mean, as far as I'm concerned, that is completely the wrong word. It's not a word I accept as a legitimate way of deciding of being a good journalist, because in an unequal society, and this comes back to when you're talking truth to power, in an unequal society, when you have, haves and have-nots, or whatever the inequality is, then if you are impartial, then you are attacking the bankers when they get out of hand, and attacking the trade unions when they get out of hand, and you are maintaining that order and maintaining that unequal society. You're not neutral, you're not impartial. As far as I'm concerned, if you maintain an unequal society, you're a reactionary. And that's a really important sort of principle, I think, of journalism. So our films are kind of hybrid, because we weren't trying to do that talking to power, but we were also trying to make a film which was journalistically absolutely impeccable and legitimate, which it was, and we have not been, there is, as far as I know, not a single mistake in our film. And that's quite an achievement, and that's after 2 years of it being tested, and a huge propaganda campaign, books being made, films being made by the Sri Lankan government, 200-word books were published by the Sri Lankan government attacking our film, and none of it has stood up. But yeah, it's an interesting game. There's one other thing. I said this once before, but we do a lot of awards, and we're trying to get awards, right? And we all love getting awards, and there's very few of us cannot get away with saying award-winning. We always do it all the time. It's probably in my biography here. But I mean, the reality is that perhaps I think probably we really need to rethink that, although it is the game we have to play. But I mean, the point is, if you've got an incredibly important story, you've got really powerful advocates, you've got really, really good evidence, you've got a shocking truth that needs to be exposed, then maybe what we should be, you bloody well should make a good film, and maybe we should be giving booby prizes to people who have all of those things and fail to make a good film. That might be a way of improving our standards.
Because there are some terrible films out there, just to make a note of this, because it is really valid, where there becomes a rise in a topic that's happening in the media, and there's kind of like a zeitgeist moment of a certain issue being very, very topical, and you'll get sent trailers, which Doug would probably have every single day. You'll get 10 trailers on the same day of the same issue of a film, and the film is terrible, and you're like, you've made a film about an issue, but you haven't made a film, you haven't made a story, you haven't made a narrative, and you've got to think that you've got to engage an audience somewhere in kind of how this issue plays out and who are the characters I'm supposed to care about and what was their personal journey. Whereas if you just solely go out to make a film about an issue and haven't considered the narrative complex, it's then just a really terrible film, and it's really difficult then to get it out to any audience. Even though your intentions were so good, you've missed the point of actually crafting a very strong narrative and a strong film. So always start any of these projects with thinking kind of, is this a solid film? Do I have kind of an interesting dialogue with my audience which highlights this issue? I mean, one year when I used to work for BritDoc, the film fund, and in 1 year we had over 100 climate change film applications. 100, because Age of Sheep had come out the year before. So everyone was like, oh, it's like a climate change film. And like every single one was like, you've either just copied the exact narrative of her film, which is just, don't do that, or it was just like, here's lots of statistics about how bad climate change is. You know, that's just really boring. Like, either of them is terrible. And the one I think that was interesting at the time was the island president. So this island's going to disappear. He won't have an island to be president of unless climate change stops. And you're like, ah. There's an interesting way into this story. So make sure that the film you're making is not just an issue film, it actually has a kind of strong narrative to it. The final part I want to raise before we go to questions is also considering the different types of impact that everybody was going for. So Callum's had a political kind of impact objective to it. So there was a specific government that they were targeting, specifically about an issue that they'd taken kind of, they'd done very badly, and they needed a political consensus around the world to stop that. Whereas kind of Riddy's project is around kind of social change in terms of kind of thinking and behavioural change of a particular part of society and how we kind of consider certain options. And what's interesting is both about kind of the reaction to how we consider the female in a rape situation, how we view them, so as a society how we're looking at that, but more importantly and kind of equally important, how we teach men about their relationship to women and understand that from a very early age. So you've got a whole spread of different audiences coming through. And then with Blackfish, it was very much on a kind of a corporate agenda. So this company essentially are doing very, very bad things. They have this beautiful, shiny SeaWorld, happy, smiling face persona, but actually what they're doing is really awful. So with your project that you're looking at, really trying to identify, like, where do you sit? Is it a corporate change agenda? Is it a political change agenda? Is it societal behavioural change, which is much harder to track in terms of how people can read that? I mean, your educational process is probably going to take 10, 20 years.
It will, you know, to see the results of it, it will be years down the line. It's only being written now, then to be adopted and adapted to every country's cultural sensitivities, you know, not changed majorly, but then it has to be fitting to which country it's going to. So in order to do that, it's another 2 to 3 years where it develops and then it gets rolled out.
Yeah. Long processes. So let's open up for some questions if anybody has any for the panel. Does anybody have questions? Right at the back. Let's start with you.
If you just want to wait for the microphone, because we're recording.
I have a question about the production of, well, actually it applies totally to both of you. Production of your films, because now you're going into countries not as citizens of those countries to do films that are extremely critical of those countries in a certain manner. So I'm just curious about, I'm guessing the government didn't give you permission to come and shoot. How are you actually going back and forth? And in the case of India's Daughter, I'm guessing you want to do more work in India about India. So you have the fear of being blacklisted now that you have a production that's banned. So was that a consideration for you and your crew, the non-Indian aspects of it? How did you approach that? Did you get permission? Did you? I'm guessing you didn't, but you know, what was the consideration around that? And how did you frame the projects, especially in terms of the government?
Well, we did get the proper permissions from the prisons, and we also had permission. So there was a different government to what is the Modi government now, and it wasn't at the time when we went to make the film. And also the DG of the prison, the head of prison, who'd granted us permission, Vimla Mehra, is no longer there either. And by the time the film had been released last year in March, she had already left. So, you know, the going back and forth to India is totally out of the question at this moment in time. We're trying to get the ban lifted, and it is in the court at the moment, and we're having a wonderful, you know, we've got wonderful lawyers who are doing pro bono work for us from iPro Bono. But the date keeps getting pushed and pushed, so we can't do the campaign work which we had initially planned to do. In particular, an NGO we were working with called Magic Bus, who works with young Indian girls and boys, who this initiative would be perfect for, but the educational tools that we had along with it would also have been great for too. And those plans have just been put on hold. And like with No Fire Zone, we had a young man who screened India's Daughter in his village outside. And huge audience members had gathered, but he was found out and arrested for doing so. So now there's complete silence about India's Daughter. People are too afraid, even supporters who we did have in India, are too afraid to speak out against the ban. So unless and if something changes, we won't be going back there to work in the near future. But this initiative is something, even though it gleaned from India's Daughter, it's something that's completely separate. So we hope that it will still be considered by India, which we hope to do, not in the immediate future, but eventually we do want. It's something that's independent of the film.
Yeah, I mean, I've only been to Sri Lanka twice. The first time I went, I had to go and I'm Scottish. I had to pretend to be a cricket supporter because it was the Cricket World Cup, and it was like the most worst cover that anyone could ever have. I don't even know how many people are in the cricket team, and I certainly, when I ask my son who's winning, he says, "Well, you can't. It's not as easy as that." I'm completely lost. And then the second time I went was for the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting when they knew I was coming, and the government had banned all demonstrations, except curiously for a series of demonstrations against Channel 4 and against me. So when we got off the plane, there was this demonstration. When we went to our hotel, there was this big demonstration. But the thing about my film was slightly different. Of course, there's a lot of the material had come out, and we made that. That was very unusual. I don't normally make films like that. I mean, but on this occasion, I was making film, mostly from evidence which had been got out one way or another, and we were putting that together. So it was quite an unusual film in that sense. I mean, mostly, I've made films. The films that I made that probably invited me to be asked to be made this first one were very much kind of, in Iraq and lots of countries. But in India, interestingly enough, they banned the film. They refused a certificate on the grounds that, two grounds. One, that the images were so offensive that you couldn't allow it, which they might have got away with. I mean, that's not the reason they did it, of course, but they might have got away with that. But the other reason was quite explicitly because it could damage relations with a friendly nation. So it's an open piece of political censorship. And I was refused a visa. I still don't have one. I still can't go to India. But I mean, normally, I think there's an interesting issue underlying what you said, actually, which is what happens when you come in and make a film attacking another country. Most of the films I've made, and what I hope will be my next film, are actually, most of the ones I've made about war crimes have been about Britain and the coalition in Iraq and things like that. But there is an issue when you go in and you make a film which certainly that country, Sri Lanka, the Sri Lankan government was able to portray as an attack on Sri Lanka, and actually was able to portray me as some kind of puppet of Western imperialism, which is a bit ironic given the other films I've made. But that was, and of course that's part of the nature of Sri Lanka, which of course is structurally a majoritarian single state in which, by definition, Tamils are left voiceless. And so they could portray me as being part of a Western attack on Sri Lanka, which I find deeply offensive because that's not where I come from. But anyway.
There's a consideration within that question as well about the kind of relationship with people in country as well. So your screening hosts.
Too, actually, because we had a screening in Vietnam where there were 600 responses. There was a huge screening to take place. On the day that the screening was about to take place, we had a call from the Ministry of Culture, and they said to me, if we don't want you showing this film, and in fact we're banning it from Vietnam because we don't want to ruin our relationship with India. We've built a strong economic relationship with them, and we're worried that it might damage it. We did end up going underground and showing it, and there were people poured out on the streets, and we did manage to get an independent documentary club that was running in the local area who agreed to screen the film. So we headed off there.
Was yours a different point to that as well?
It's on exactly the same point.
Yeah.
Is this on? Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I wanted to ask you both, because I think you've made some terrific films, is this dilemma about how it's seen in country. I remember talking to somebody very senior at Channel 4 who said that No Fire Zone was probably one of the finest things they'd ever done, but they worried whether they'd got the message right for Sri Lanka. Now you can see also things, films like Josh Oppenheimer debate about Indonesia. How can one conceptualize the impact in country when you're planning a film like the ones you're making?
I mean, the trouble in Sri Lanka was that the majority community, the Sinhalese, have been consistently lied to by their government. I mean, throughout the war, they were being told that there was a policy of 0 civilian casualties, and most people believed it. There was incredibly heavy censorship. That's why a lot of our strategy for dealing with this and for dealing with the attacks on us is to translate it into Sinhala, is to try and get it into the country in Sinhalese, and to try and get, and that is beginning to happen, and the word people are beginning to go, something really did happen, something was far wrong. But it is really difficult when you are being portrayed as just someone who's telling lies. And when I went to Sri Lanka for the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting, I mean, the vast majority of Sinhalese people believed that I was the devil incarnate. That everything I said was a lie. That the evidence was faked. That the footage was faked. They even produced a copy of one of the execution footages in which they dubbed it in Tamil to try and pretend it was Tamils that done the executions. And most people believed it, and most Sinhalese people believed it. So I mean, there's not a lot you can do, and also you can't afford to be intimidated by that. And also, the reality is that although we were having demonstrations and death threats, the reality is that when we were in Sri Lanka, the real problem was that I couldn't go and talk to people, and the reason I couldn't go and talk to people wasn't because of risks to me; it was because of risks to them. And that was that they were anyone who spoke to me, and people did try to speak to me, and I was like, really kind of quite worried about speaking to people. So my ability to do anything as a journalist was actually very limited because they were taking the risks, not me.
Question here. Did you have a response?
Well, I wanted to answer your question. I think for us, it was we had similar sort of situation when we left India after they had heard about it. It was the more of the problem was that we were getting death threats, we were getting rape threats to say, well, and I think the problem was because they saw us as outsiders, and they said, well, how dare you come to our country and talk about a problem which also happens in your country too. But there was a point that was missed slightly, that the only reason why we decided to make this film in particular was because that was the only country that we saw who had come out in, there were so many people who came out to fight for it, and it was a case that was known worldwide. And we wanted to use it as an example to start discussions around the world. Now, when the film was banned, we were on our way back from India, and on the way back, the BBC had brought the broadcast of the film forward. It was due to be released on the 8th of March. And because they had brought it forward, their version was different to the one that we were going to show in India. In India, it's illegal to name a rape victim. So the reason why we were in India at the time was to remove, at every point it says Jyoti, to replace it with Nirbhaya. Now, she was known internationally. Her dad had talked about her in international newspapers and named her. So we thought there was nothing wrong that we were doing there. And because that version was never seen by the government or the Indian public, and the version that was leaked was the BBC version, it's a shame that we couldn't see the trailer, but at the end of the trailer there's some statistics that roll, which is global statistics about rape in countries around the world. Now, because that version wasn't leaked, it seemed like an India-centric problem, and that was one of the reasons why we were getting these, threats, because the point was missed. They thought we were trying to shed India in a bad light, whereas all we were doing with this film was using India as an example of fighting for women's rights, and we wanted to show that there are problems in other countries also. Unfortunately, the version that was leaked was the wrong version.
Hi, thank you. So when you're making a documentary, and particularly the documentary that I'm making at the moment, it's changed quite dramatically from what I was expecting to find as you uncover more things. At what stage do you start approaching distributors and film festivals? Because I approached people last year and I kind of feel I wasted my time, because what we found now is much more in depth and it's a different question being asked.
Let's go to Patrick from that. So kind of what kind of stages have people come to you, and what's the prime for you?
Yeah, like we have conversations with producers and filmmakers at concept stage when it's just like a one-pager. I filmed, I think in 2011, Dreams of a Life, about the woman in a flat. That was, that partnership with Doug Wolf was done at treatment before the film went into making. And more, speaking about Doug Wolf, is we're interested in getting in films at an earlier stage as possible. Now, if your situation with your project is such that you're shooting the type of film that is taking twists and turns, and you've embarked upon the type of documentary, which the ones I really like are the ones where it's very clear that this project began as something and went somewhere different. So obviously, like, the sort of nature of the beast of the documentary like that is it's very hard to then tell someone who's going to come on board and what's it going to look like at the end. But you know, when to have that conversation is when you think you have something that a partner can get behind, and it may be the case, as it is with us, that, you know, we'll have that conversation early at a meat market. So those kind of forums that you have at festivals like you know, like Sheffield and IDFA and CPH, and in the great ones in the States as well, where you can have those interactions with producers and broadcasting partners and distributors in particular, to get to put these projects on the radar. And it may be the case that, you know, right now, sorry, we're not ready to commit, but do keep us updated, and then as your project evolves, keep that conversation going. So yeah, the earlier the better. I guess one thing to be really wary of is don't leave it like so late that we say, oh, we've just had a really great screening in London and we got really good reaction to it. Do you want to distribute it now? And we're like, well, you kind of blown the premiere thing that we need to use to then get it in places. And it's so, just, yeah. Also, I think it's good to have conversations with people in parts of the industry that maybe you don't have so much expertise about, so you can kind of learn the hoops you need to jump through and mistakes not to make. So when you catch those people, ask them what to do.
There's a key point in that, in terms of kind of what you may think is good to do, which actually is commercially terrible to do. So have a chat with any kind of distribution partner before you do any kind of exhibition. So any online, especially online, don't put it online until you've had a chat. Like, if you have some commercial considerations, make sure you talk to somebody first, because it can ruin a strategy that could have been amazing with a potential partner and to bring on board. Any other questions from here?
So a few questions. Callum, you've also made a lot of documentaries for TV, and you said that this was your first feature film. Could you maybe just talk about the difference between the two and the process? And you also said that you learnt a lot with this film, and so you would do things differently. So what would you do differently? And then secondly, for Patrick, you mentioned a word where you said entertainment. And is there a point where you have a great film about social change, but actually doesn't really work on the theatrical release side of a film? And is there anything that you can define that makes a difference between the two?
Start with Callum.
I mean, there are certain obvious differences between TV and a feature doc, which I kind of almost go without saying. But I mean, you know, when you're making a TV program, you're making a program which you've got to keep people watching the telly all the time. You've got to stop and make a cup of tea. You've got advert breaks. There's a whole different discipline, and also you can't be kind of you can't be as openly a kind of campaigning. You know, your sense of anger has to be slightly moderated in a way. So a feature doc is very different. I mean, the reason I found the process of making the feature doc, I mean, hard but incredibly liberating, was because, you know, I knew that if people came to watch this film, they'd committed to it. I could have time to bring people into it. I could have time to tell people backgrounds, and also I could set things up. I mean, narratively, you know, I mean, this sounds like a really shocking thing to say, but, you know, if you're making a 90-minute film, which is what we ended up making, 93 minutes, it's really got to work as a drama, is what you were talking about. So even though we're doing really, you know, we're dealing with terrible evidence of war crimes, and it's really, really visceral and awful evidence of war crimes, you still have to make it work. You still have to draw people in. And in a sense, you can sort of, with a feature doc, you can do, well, in certainly the kind of feature doc that was, you can actually do, a thing I use as an analogy, which is a bit, most of you are probably too young to remember it, but there was a film called Towering Inferno, right, which was a film in which there was a clue about what happened at the end of the film in the title. There was also a clue on the poster which showed this Towering Inferno. And everybody went to this film and they sat down and then they watched quite detailed stuff. I can't remember the exact details about the architect and the engineer was cutting corners and he was using cheaper cables than he should have done. And your audience is going, oh, you know, that's not a good thing to do. You never know what could happen there. And there's a kind of conceit where your audience, because they know there's something tremendously important happening at the end, will listen to the detail and will pay attention to the detail and understand the background. And actually, with No Fire Zone, because in the nature of a feature doc, you couldn't really do with a TV film, because I got the audience there and they knew what this film was about fundamentally, and they knew terrible things were going to happen at the end of it, but you could actually explain nuances which you wouldn't really get away with in television, because, you know, and which are very important to really understand what happened. And also just to make it a drama that worked. I mean, to make it something that you stayed compelled to and you watched, you know. And there were other things that you would never do in television. I mean, for example, the thing that gave me the most sleepless nights, and which, funnily enough, not a single person has ever objected to, but one of the things that gave me really sleepless nights when I was making the film was because we had to use, because it was evidence, so I couldn't do any of the things that you might do in a feature, to use a representative shot or sort of recreation of, well, this happened at a different time, but it kind of shows what happened. Because we were doing it day by day, each piece of evidence and each piece of video and each piece of thing had to be the actual piece of evidence and the actual piece of video. It also meant that very often when a shell landed, the camera was only turned on after the shell landed, so we didn't have footage of the shell landing. So I had to sort of use devices like, which you wouldn't get away with in television, like fading to black, then borrowing the sound effect of a shell dying from somewhere else in the war, so it's still a genuine shell, but doing it on black, and then slowly bringing the image up onto the aftermath. And that kind of thing you couldn't do in TV because it takes too long, you know. But it allowed me to be absolutely accurate. And it also, there was, apart from some mute shots, which were, you know, shots of bombing from the air, we didn't use sound effects. I mean, we used the actual sound. But what I did do was I got an orchestral score. And that was what gave me sleepless nights, because I thought, I've got a composer, a great composer, who was composing an orchestral score. We did an extraordinary deal, because everything had to be done so tightly. We did an extraordinary deal with a music library. And they said, well, look, here's our music. And they said, right, okay, we'll take the music, it'll be ours. We will pay for an orchestra, 45-piece orchestra, to do a performance. So we actually had a full orchestral score, which we then handed to this distributor. We don't own it, but we got to use it for effectively very little. But, you know, you're putting an orchestral score to atrocity footage. And that I really freaked me. I can remember, you know, sort of being really, really worried about what I was doing. But in fact, nobody's objected to it at all. And I think it does work. I think it's right, and I think it helps you carry through it. So there's sort of still, you know, cinematic devices that you're doing, even though what you're doing is presenting evidence in a very, very kind of forensic kind of way. But you couldn't have done that with TV. It had to be different. You know, TV was much more, yeah.
Excellent answer. Because of the time, just we'll look at that final point to Patrick and then wrap up, but just on the consideration between issue and drama.
Yeah, I'm super relieved that, that you've asked that question about entertainment. It's something I really wanted to clarify before the conclusion of this discussion, because it may sound a bit like my line tonight has been more entertaining the better. The more sensational you can make the film, the better. More people are going to kind of come to it. And I guess in this conversation about political impacts, about audiences and entertainment and what becomes popular, and then also one thing we haven't talked a lot about is sort of art, and you know, some people who are coming to filmmaking and cinema because they have a sort of artistic need to it. You know, the consideration with what you're ultimately doing is some form of communication, and your objectives, whether they be kind of top-line political, will inform what it is that how it is that you package your product, your film, right? So when I'm saying, like, it's great if you can borrow other genres and make it kind of being something that's capable of being positioned as a thriller or as an action film, you know, if that's going to mean that more people are going to kind of see it. But by no means, if your motivation for making the film and doing this type of filmmaking is to perhaps also be doing something very, you know, personal and artistic and of a particular sensibility that you want to connect with people through making this, you know, that then comes back to a subjective decision about what you're doing. So it's not always the case that the more sensational, the better. And if you look across Dogwolf's catalogue, we absolutely champion films that are perhaps more arguably less accessible than others, and have a place in cinema culture and art house culture and documentary culture. So I just really want to sort of say that it's not, the line is not the more, you know, action-y you can make it, the better. It'll come down to what are your objectives for the film after it's made. And I think, I'm sorry to say it, but so often you encounter people who are making films who don't think about that part, about the end. They don't start with the end in mind. And sometimes maybe that's what gets people to do this crazy journey in the first place, is they're not sort of thinking. But I hate it when someone arrives at that point when they have made the film and then they say, well, why am I not in all the cinemas? Or why am I having such a struggle to find an audience? It's just like, well, because dude, you chose to make a film that's like that doesn't really fit neatly into these sort of audience categories and stuff. So I think my answer to your question about how entertaining do you make it, or if you have a subject that's not easily transformable into a piece of entertainment like I've described, then you need to say to yourself, okay, do I still want to do it? Aware of the fact that there's not too many other films that have trodden a path that have resulted in a certain size audience for it. You know, if you're happy with a couple of screenings and a few Q&As and a bit of press, and that's because you've seen other films of this style do that, then be at peace with that and be happy to that and own that decision, and don't expect, you know, to be in 20 cinemas necessarily if you haven't made something like that. And by the same token, if you're willing to make certain concessions and sort of, you know, mold your film in a more entertaining way, and that you don't have any personal reservations to do it so that it can be more mainstream and more popular, like that's what you sort of need to do. So I think filmmakers or people who are embarking on this journey really need to think about that whole, when it's done and when it's sort of being carried to the audience, and when it maybe ends up in the hands of a distributor, or if I'm doing this myself, it's really important that you've at least thought about it that at the start, so that you're not in the position where you've already done it and then you're kind of being like, oh, I wish I'd done it differently. So in the end of the day, it's just a very personal decision, but just pay attention to other films and how audiences consume films, so that at least you're not doing it completely in the dark.
Thank you, Patrick. Sorry that we went over a little bit late, but everyone looked very eager and interested still, so I kept going, but we really should stop now. So thank you so much to our contributors this evening. Very interesting insights.